So how did the beast of the earth make an image to the first beast whose head was wounded? And I've got some ideas here that may tie in with how people were forced to worship the beast and to wear its mark, and that they might not buy or sell if they didn't. And even if you still believe that a mark is coming for us today, and that is something that you have to wear in your hand or in your forehead, or is inserted or implanted, or even something that genetically changes you to think in a slave-like manner to the beast, it still ties in with these ideas that I'm bringing up. What was the Roman Republic? So the Roman Republic used a complex system that incorporated a Senate, consul, magistrates, tribunes, and at times a dictator and other public officials. This system changed over time, incorporating the interests of both the patricians, the families of Rome that were from a noble elite background, and the plebeians, Roman citizens who were not nobles and often come from poorer backgrounds. In 366 BC, the system consisted of two consuls, a praetor, plebeian tribunes who could hold a great deal of power, quaestors, who specialized in financial affairs, two aediles who were in charge of public safety, grain supply, Rome's market, and public religious games, and a census who kept track of Rome's population, a senate, several magistrates, a plebeian assembly or council, a centuriate assembly, and at times a dictator who, with the approval of Rome's Senate, could hold absolute power for 6 months during a military campaign. So Brigman said by 321 BC, the Republic established a rule that required one consul to be from a patrician background, one from a plebeian background. So the way the Republic in Rome was ruled was it had mainly two rulers, one that was from the plebeian, one from the patrician, one focused on religion in the Roman kingdom, and the third was the dictator who took total rulership in the times of war. The key to Rome's victory was the fact that it had much larger military force to draw upon. So Rome's strength was based on its military, and by the time Julius Caesar came, he was a dictator who then changed the system to the emperor system, where it was all ruled in one man. It says here, in the period after 146 BC, Rome's territory continued to grow, but the city's republic government crumbled. Strong men such as Sulla, Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Octavian vied for control of Rome. Civil wars and violent unrest occurred during this time. So the Roman historian Sallust lived 85 BC to 35 BC, believed that the increasing amount of wealth in Rome, generated partially through Rome's conquered territories, helped bring about the rise of these strong men and the fall of the Roman Republic. The lust for money first, then for power, grew upon them. These were, I may say, the root of all evils, wrote Sallust, translation by John Carew Rolfe. So Rome also was based on taxing the kingdoms or empires that it conquered and the regions that it conquered, and raising wealth through taxing these nations. On the UNRV Roman history site, it talks about taxes in Rome, and it says, in the early days of the Roman Republic, public taxes consisted of modest assessments on owned wealth and property. The tax rate under normal circumstances was 1%, and sometimes would climb as high as 3%. Wow, if they were taxed as much as we were today, there would be anarchy. In situations such as war, these modest taxes were levied against land, homes, and other real estate, slaves, animals, personal items, and monetary wealth. Taxes were collected from individuals, and at times payments could be refunded by the Treasury for excess collections. With limited census accuracy, tax collection on individuals was a difficult task at best. So riches from conquests. By 167 BC, the Republic had enriched itself greatly through a series of conquests. Gains such as silver and gold mines in Hispania created an excellent source of revenue for the state and a much larger tax base through its provincial residents. By this time, Rome no longer needed to levy a tax against its citizens and looked only to the provinces for collections. With expansion, Roman censors found that accurate census taking in the provinces was a difficult task at best. To ease the strain, taxes were assessed as a tithe on entire communities rather than on individuals. Tax assessments in these communities fell under the jurisdiction of provincial governors and various local magistrates using rules similar to the old system. So we see in the Bible that Mary and Joseph go down to Bethlehem to register for the census. This was all based around tax for the Romans. So in the 1st century BC, the Emperor Augustus changed the tax system. After considerably more Roman expansion, Augustus essentially put an end to tax farming. Complaints from provincials for excessive assessments and large unpayable debts ushered in the final days of the lucrative business. The publican continued to exist as moneylenders and entrepreneurs, but easy access to wealth through taxes was gone. Tax farming was replaced by direct taxation early in the empire, and each province was required to pay a wealth tax of about 1% and a flat poll tax on each adult. This new procedure, of course, required regular census taking to evaluate the taxable number of people and their income wealth status. Taxation in this environment switched mainly from one of own property and wealth to that of an income tax. As a result, the taxable yield varied greatly based on economic conditions, but theoretically, the process was fairer and less open to corruption. In contrast, the publicani had to focus their efforts on collecting revenues where it was most easily available due to limited time and capacity. Their efforts were mainly directed at the cash wealthy because converting property into cash could be a difficult process. Additionally, growth of a provincial tax base went straight to the coffers of the publicani. They had the luxury of bidding against previous tax collections, and the Treasury knowledge of increased wealth would take several collections before auction prices were raised. In this way, the publicani increased their own wealth, but eventually the state would reap the benefit of increased collections down the line. So in Rome, they also had the cult of emperor worship. It says the Roman cult established during the reign of Augustus, first in the provinces but not in Italy, and practiced throughout the Roman Empire. It is the direct continuation of the Hellenistic worship of the ruler. Emperor worship first appeared in Palestine during the reign of Herod the Great. Although it was completely unacceptable to Jewish population, Herod could nevertheless not afford to lag behind other vassal princes in establishing the cult. Thus, although a temple was not erected in Jerusalem to honor the emperor, these rites were adopted in the cities of Sebaste and Caesarea, both predominantly non-Jewish. The Jewish population, though not the Christian, was everywhere exempted from the loyal duty of emperor worship, and only one attempt was made to compel the Jewish nation to accept emperor worship when Caligula issued a decree to erect a statue of himself in the sanctuary at Jerusalem. So this was in Josephus' Antiquities, and Philo and Tacitus mentions this as well. The decree was never carried out, however, due to the death of Caligula in January 41 CE. Following the destruction of the Second Temple, there was a tendency among the rabbis to mitigate various laws concerning idolatry, which was no longer considered a threat to the Jewish community. Nevertheless, these same rabbis continued to reject any compliance with the imperial cult. So which other kingdom expected emperor worship and bowing to a statue of the emperor? In Daniel 3, we have the other use of the number 666 in the Bible. So it's linked with Solomon, it's linked with King Nebuchadnezzar, and it's in Revelation. The image of gold. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the straps, the administrators, the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all music, all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Interestingly, I came across this Marduk prophecy when looking at the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And it's regarding as son of mighty god Enki, creator and protector of humanity, Marduk played an important role in Mesopotamian mythology and history of Babylon. Babylon was a sacred city dedicated to the cult of Marduk, who there his temple there and a golden statue. In ancient times, Babylon was considered almost the center of the world. Even Alexander the Great was charmed by its beauty and power. Now, Marduk, remember, was related to this little dragon god, Mushusu, and it goes on to say, from an ancient Assyrian text known as the Marduk prophecy, also referred to as the Sulgi prophecies, one can learn about Marduk's journey to the lands of the Hittites, the Assyrians, and Elamites, and the prediction of the future king who will lead Marduk back from Elam, an ancient country in southwestern Iran. According to historians, the Marduk prophecy was written sometime between 713 and 612 BC. The ancient document was unearthed in the house of Exodus, close to a temple in the city of Ashur, the first capital of the Assyrian Empire. Since the document was most likely written during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar I, most historians suggest it served as a propaganda piece to celebrate his victory. The Marduk prophecy describes the return of a strong and powerful king who will restore peace and order to the city by bringing home the statue of the god. Now, in this stele they found, says details from the Kaduru of Nebuchadnezzar, granting city Marduk freedom from taxation. So what's really interesting about this is he's granting him freedom from taxation. We have this image here of this, what looks like a soldier, and it has chicken legs or a bird's body, but it has a scorpion's tail. And it has a hat on, but it looks like it could have long hair as well, like a woman. And when we go to Revelation 9 here in the trumpet judgments, it says that, verse 7 we'll start with, the shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the face of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months, and they had the king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he is the name Apollyon. One woe is past, behold, still more woes are coming after these things. I just think it's really interesting that this stele image seems to depict these creatures in Revelation 9, and also that it's related to Nebuchadnezzar forgiving or removing the payment of tax to this person. So why do Muslims bow down towards Kaaba in their prayers? Kaaba is the Qibla, the direction Muslims face during their prayers. It is important to note that though Muslims face the Kaaba during prayers, they do not worship the Kaaba. Muslims worship and bow down to none other but Allah. It is mentioned in Surah Baqarah. They not only pray in that direction, they also sacrifice animals in that direction. So in the Encyclopedia Britannica, prayers, the second pillar, consists of 5 daily canonical prayers. These prayers may be offered individually if one is unable to go to the mosque. The first prayer is performed before sunrise, the second just after noon, the third in the late afternoon, the fourth immediately after sunset, and the fifth before retiring to bed. Before a prayer, absolutions are performed, including washing of hands, face, and feet. The muezzin, one who gives the call for prayers, chants aloud from a raised plate, such as a tower in the mosque. So although Muslims are not allowed to play music or instruments, they chant a prayer, which is like when the music plays and everybody bows down and prays. The strict doctrine, the 5 daily prayers cannot be waived even for the sick, who may pray in bed and, if necessary, lying down. So the zakat, the third pillar, is the obligatory tax called zakat, purification, indicating that such a payment makes the rest of one's wealth religiously and legally pure. This is the only permanent tax levied by the Quran and is payable annually on food, grains, cattle, and cash after 1 year's possession. The amount varies for different categories. Thus, on grains and fruits, it is 10%. If land is watered by rain, 5%. If land is watered artificially. And we can see that this is coming in with these green taxes as well that we're under today, where they own the water that falls from the sky. On cash and previous metals, it is 2.5%. Zakat is collectible by the state and is to be used primarily for the poor, but the Quran mentions other purposes: ransoming Muslim war captives, redeeming chronic debts, paying tax collectors' fees, jihad, and by extension, according to Quran commentators, education and health, and creating facilities for travelers. After the breakup of Muslim religio-political power, payment of zakat became a matter of voluntary charity, dependent on individual conscience. So I'm just going to read some of this article on the third eye. And it says the third eye of the occult is said to be center of the forehead and is one of the 7 chakras in the chakra system. It is also referred to as the brow chakra and is claimed to be the most important chakra. Meaning of the mark in the forehead. The Bible speaks repeatedly on the importance of the mark in the forehead and the spiritual meaning it represents. Jehovah said, "Go through the midst of Jerusalem and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that groan and sigh for all the abominations that are done in the midst thereof, and smite, let not your eyes spare, but not near against any man upon whom is marked." And that's in Ezekiel 9:46. Behold the Lamb standing on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, the name of his Father written in their foreheads, Revelation 14:1. They shall see the face of God and the Lamb, and his name shall be on their foreheads, Revelation 22:4. It was said that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men not got the mark of God on their foreheads, Revelation 9:4. So for the Lord to talk so much about the mark on the forehead, that marked foreheads must be of utmost importance. The forehead will either have the mark of God or the mark of the beast. That's why, to the occultist, the third eye in the center of the forehead is considered the most important chakra. It is a seat of true love and devotion either to Jehovah or Satan. That's why you see in most Eastern religions the worshippers have a mark in the center of their forehead in which the sign of love and devotion to the same deity of theirs. The forehead mark is the most important to have, the mark of God or the mark of the beast. So all of these Eastern religions have marks on their foreheads, and this is said the mark that people wear on their forehead is called the tilak or potu. This mark invokes a sense of purity in the wearer. Tilak is a blessing of the Lord and is considered as a protection against wrong tendencies and forces to keep our foreheads cool and prevents energy loss. So why do Indians have a red dot in their head? Why do many Hindus wear a dot near the middle of their forehead? The purpose of the bindi. It says there are 7 main chakras that run along the center of the body, and as such, the red dot signifies piety as well as serving. The word bindi dates back to the hymn of creation known as Nasadiya Sukta in the Rig Veda. It also describes as the sacred symbol of the cosmos in the unmanifested state. A bindi is a bright dot of some color applied in the center of the forehead close to the eyebrows, worn in the Indian subcontinent, particularly among Hindus in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia among Balinese, Javanese, Malaysian, Singaporean, and Burmese Hindus. A similar marking is also worn by babies and children in China. And like the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, represents the opening of the third eye. Bindu is the point or dot around which the mandala is created, representing the universe. Traditionally, the area between the eyebrows where the bindi is placed is said to be the 6th chakra, Ajna, the seat of concealed wisdom. So we've got number 6 here, marking this chakra. The dot is worn on the forehead as a religious symbol. It represents divine sight and shows that one is a Hindu. For women, it is also a beauty mark. Long answer. The dot worn between the eyes or in the middle of the forehead is a sign that one is a Hindu. It is called the bindi in the Hindu language, bindu in Sanskrit, and potu in Tamil. In olden days, all Hindu men and women wore these marks, and they both also wore earrings. Today, it is the women who are the most faithful in wearing the bindi. The dot is a Hindu, not Indian tradition. It is common error to confuse the term Hindu and Indian though. Vast majority of Indian people are Hindu, but India also encompasses many Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and peoples of other faiths. Traditionally, the dot carries no gender limitations. Men as well as women wear it. So we have these Eastern faiths that trace back to the area of Babylon. And now we have the Roman Catholic faith. Catholics have to put ashes on their foreheads for how long? Hundreds and hundreds, actually thousands of years. One of the fun parts of Ash Wednesday is comparing your ashes to everyone else. It's also energizing to see total strangers walking down the street and knowing by their dusty foreheads that they are united with you in the observance of this holy day and season. It says Catholics first started putting ashes on their forehead on Ash Wednesday as early as the 8th century, when the practice can be found in Gregorian Sacramentary, a book with directives for the liturgy. That's simple. The earliest record date for doing so is likely a much earlier tradition. Long before that, donning sackcloth, a coarse animal hair, shirt, and ashes was a Jewish penitential practice. We see it many times in the Old Testament. For example, in the book of Jonah, the king of Nineveh puts on sackcloth and sits in ashes when Jonah prophesies the destruction of the city. Our Lord refers to this practice in the Gospel of Matthew. So we have this Roman Catholic faith wearing ashes on their forehead. So what's the significance of crossing the forehead, lips, and heart before the Gospel reading? Just before the Gospel reading, the celebrant leads us in the gesture with our thumbs, making a sign of the cross on our foreheads, lips, and hearts. Who created this and why? As early as the 9th century, the faithful were making the sign of the cross on their forehead and breast as a reading of the gospel. Then in the 11th century, we find the deacon and faithful making the sign of the cross on the forehead, mouth, and breast after the words, a reading of the Holy Gospel. In the Jewish faith, they wear the tefillin, who are two small black boxes with black straps attached to them. Jewish men are required to place one box on their forehead, on their head, and tie the other one on their arm each weekday morning. Tefillin are biblical in origin and are commanded within the context of several laws outlining a Jew's relationship to God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a frontlet between your eyes, in Deuteronomy 6:5-8. So certain Jewish groups, including probably the Sadducees and definitely the medieval Karaites, understood the last verse to be figurative. It means only that one should always be preoccupied with the word of the Torah as if they were in the front of the eyes. The Pharisees, however, took the text literally. The words of the Torah are to be inscribed on a scroll and placed directly between one's eyes and on one's arm. Tefillin are wrapped around the arm 7 times, and the straps on the head are adjusted so they fit snugly. So the tefillin is commonly translated as phylacteries, though the Hebrew term is more often used. So for the Muslim, it's a black mark on the forehead. So the black mark on the forehead is the result of prolonged and frequent prostrations of some people. But it is not necessary that everyone who does prolonged and frequent prostrations will acquire this mark. It says, Allah says in the Holy Quran, chapter 48, Surah Fath, verse 29, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are hard on the disbelievers and merciful among themselves. When you see them, you will find them bowing down and falling prostrate. They have the marks of prostration on their faces, by which they are distinguished from others. Just on a side note, this is complete opposite to what Jesus taught, which was not to give alms on the outside or to show people that you are pious, like whitewashed tombs, that it's the man on the inside and not the physical that mark the man of God. These marks of prostration could be the physical black marks on the forehead from prostrations, but most of the scholars are of the opinion that Allah implies the marks and traces of the fear of Allah, munificence, the nobility and the goodness of manner that naturally appear on the faces of a person on account of bowing down and sincerely worshipping the one Lord of the worlds. So here is a Muslim showing the black mark on his forehead from prostration to Allah. So in Islam, they also wear this headband with the name of Allah on it. This declaration is worn by millions of Muslim jihadists, and it is fairly unique to Muslims and is becoming a prominent feature of the jihad movement. So young people are wearing the mark. So it goes on to show the name that is written, mirrored Chechen Islamic militaristic flag. So note how 666 was written by the Apostle John, which matches the Islamic cross swords and Allah Akbar. So this is how 666 is written in Greek. We have here X for 600, this little wiggly sign for 60, and what looks like a 5 for 6 with a dot and a line on top. Cross swords, Allah, in the name of. It's very similar, but even if it isn't 666 on the forehead, what it is the mind's showing the thought in the mind and the belief and actions to follow a god or a false god system. As we know, Allah is the moon god. So we can see here in all major religions on earth, we have a tradition of representing our faith on our forehead or on the hand, which is the action. And obviously through all of these faiths, it represents your commitment or your servitude to the God through your thoughts or in your actions in your hand. And in Revelation, it talks about receiving the mark in either your forehead or on your hand. So I think that might represent that you will either believe this system and do it willingly through your thoughts and your beliefs, or you will just submit to this system and just do it in your actions to buy and sell within its system. So in this article, The Mark of the Beast in Islam, it says the number of the beast has been an enigma since the book of Revelation was written. Many interpret the mark as a high-tech device implanted into or onto their right hand or forehead. This scenario remains possible. However, could there be an alternative explanation? The following analysis is only presented as a hypothesis which requires further research. So it says in the book of Revelation 13, 16, 18, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count, or decide and reckon, the number, indefinite number, multitude, of the beast, for it is a number of a man, and his number is chi zi stigma, is 666. The alternate possible word translations from Greek are enclosed within parenthesis in the verses above. The word mark is translated from Greek charagma. Strong's Greek Concordance reference 5480 is a scratch or etching, i.e. stamp, as a badge of servitude, or sculpted figure, statue. Graven image in the Roman context, charagma was the imperial stamp that was placed on official documents. It was also a badge of servitude, etched, inscribed, or branded on slaves to designate ownership. Soldiers often branded themselves with the name of their favorite general, and religious cult devotees placed tattoos of their favorite gods as symbolic of their devotion and allegiance. So interestingly, Islamic jihadists and devotees of Islam often wear headbands on their foreheads and patches with their right arms with a mark of submission. The Bismillah, Islamic creed of "In the name of Allah," followed by two crossed swords etched or inscribed on the material. The chi zi stigma has been an enigma to the church, and some have reckoned it as a symbol rather than a number. The mark chi zi stigma has an uncanny resemblance to the Bismillah combined with the universal Islamic symbol of crossed swords. The Greek text translates forehead and hand into the plural form due to the word there in the sentence construction. Yet it refers to the singular form of forehead and hand regarding the individual. The significance of the right hand or arm and forehead in the Islamic context derives from the traditions. Walid Shobat comments on this fact. He says, amazingly, and in keeping perfectly with what the Bible predicted so long ago regarding the beast and his mark, the badge is in fact an Islamic commandment from the Prophet himself. Says, Allah will save a man from my nation above all creation on Judgment Day. In front of him will be laid 99 registers for his sins. Every register is as long as the eye can see. When he is asked, do you deny any of these? Then he says, no, Lord. Then he is asked, do you have any excuses? He responds, no, Lord. Then he is told, you have but one good deed, and there will be no condemnation for you today. A badge is brought forth. Scrolled across it are the words, no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Then he is asked to bring forth his deeds. He is asked, O Lord, What is the badge that is with these registers? He is told, you will receive no condemnation. The deeds are put on one hand and the badge in the other. Then the register will float and the badge will outweigh the register. Timothy 2:6-9:30. Now I think when I get to the day of judgment, I would feel much better having Jesus standing as a witness for me than having one of these badges. It also reminds me of the Egyptian weighing of the heart, where a person's heart is placed on the scales and weighed against a feather. And if their heart weighs more than their feather, then they are too burdened and heavy to go on to the afterlife. It goes on to say, the name of the beast, along with variations of the name of Allah, is worn as a sign of submission on the right arm or forehead. Islam is submission and allegiance to a foreign god. The Shahadatan is blasphemous. The badge worn by Muslims on the forehead, all of these things meet the biblical requirements of the mark of the beast. Not only do they meet the requirements of the mark of the beast, they're a blatant rejection of the salvation of Jesus. And we can see that those that accept the mark or this badge as a forgiveness of sin when they go into the judgment are making a choice to take the mark and reject Jesus as a covering. Shahadatan is the Islamic creed or article declaration of faith. It is an Arabic phrase, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul Allah, which literally means there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the one sent by Allah, messenger of Allah. This creed fits the definition of blasphemy on both counts. First, it claims another foreign god besides Yahweh as the only true God. Second, it places Muhammad to the prominent position that only Jesus can fulfill. So to be following Islam is a blatant rejection of the sacrifice that Jesus made and God made by giving his son for us. Interestingly, Islamic tradition points to Mecca as the origin of the beast system. Shia backquotes two Islamic hadiths. The beast will come out of Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. The Prophet Muhammad took me to a place in the desert near Mecca. It was a dry piece of land surrounded by sand. The Prophet Muhammad said, the beast will emerge from this place. It was a very small area. Now, how interesting is this? Because we know from the historical archaeology that Mecca was not around in the time of Muhammad. And in fact, the city of Petra was called Mecca in those days and was a trading hub for the Nabateans and, as I've shown before, also the Idumeans. And it was linked to the Herod family. Likewise, in the Bible, the angel took John into the desert to see the woman, or the whore of Babylon, riding a beast likely coming out of the desert of Arabia. There are numerous biblical passages which equate the whore of Babylon geographically within Arabia, which was part of the ancient Babylonian Empire. This hypothesis is presented to inspire further research and investigation into this important element of eschatology study. Now, how about I give you another scenario? Why is it a future event? Because Jesuit futurism has placed in everybody's head that this is happening in the future. Why isn't the man of perdition or the false prophet simply the Prophet Muhammad? And I've come to the conclusion that this beast of the earth, this Islamic Ottoman Empire, which takes up most of the eastern provinces that were ruled by Rome, including Persia and beyond, extending into the nation of India and Southeastern Asia in the form of the Islamic religion, is based on this Prophet Muhammad, who, as we can see, brought fire down from heaven in the name of Barak, has risen up to heaven like Jesus, come back down again with scriptures given to him by God, supposedly, and now he's saying that for salvation, all we need to do is receive one of these badges of Islam when we go face our judgment. If anyone fits the description of a false prophet, to me it would be the Prophet Muhammad, who is trying to replicate the life of Jesus. So it goes on to say, significance of the right hand. Further parallels between Islam and the mark of the beast are evidenced by Muhammad's obsession with the right hand or right side. The obsession with the right side was dominant in a myriad of pagan customs. While entering a mosque, one had to begin with the right foot. The Prophet used to start everything from the right for good things whenever it was possible in all his affairs, for example, in washing, combing, or wearing shoes. An account of one of Muhammad's meals was illustrative of his obsession. Milk mixed with water was brought to Allah's apostle while a Bedouin was on his right side and Abu Bakr was on his left. He drank of it and then gave it to the Bedouin and said, the right, first. Another account stated, so Allah's apostle said to me, O boy, mention the name of Allah and eat with your right hand. Likewise, any bathroom duties could not be done with the right hand. If a Muslim was caught stealing, his right hand was cut off from his arm as directed by Islamic law. By having the right hand cut off, the Muslim was degraded. The rigid Islamic law required one to eat and do most of one's daily activities as prescribed by Muhammad with the right hand. The individual would thus become a social outcast from the Islamic community. Now, this is in Roman Catholicism too. I know for a fact that in the old days, anyone who was left-handed would be punished and forced to write their right hand because the left hand was considered of the devil. Muhammad had a fanatical and rigid custom of doing everything with the right hand and commended his followers to do likewise. This strict adherence to Muhammad's injections and habits continued into the present. A friend of mine related an anecdotal account from his experience as an English teacher in Saudi Arabia. The first day of his arrival, he reported to the personal officer he was an older man with a beard, signifying his religious devotion. The officer held out his right hand while my friend attempted to hand his documents from his left hand. There was an awkward standoff for several seconds until my friend's immediate boss leaned over and whispered, right hand. Once the papers were offered from the right hand, they were accepted in light of this tradition. One may deem this another significant parallel between Islam and the mark of the beast. On the right hand, currently Islamic devotees wear a mark of the Bismillah or Islamic creed on their right arms, but in the future this may be easily changed to the right hand. Standard practice of beheadings. One of the most glaring similarities between the Antichrist and the Mahdi involve the preferred method of killing. The Islamic mullahs teach that in the end times there will not be an option for subjects to live as dhimmis. Thus, one must join the Islamic community of believers by submission to Allah or die beheaded. If one chose to submit to Allah, they are given permission to buy and sell as fellow believers in the worldwide caliphate empire. This scenario has biblical parallels. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. In addition, the Antichrist empire will believe the following: the time cometh that whosoever killeth you think that he doeth God's service. The entire history of Islam since the 7th century has incorporated mass beheadings as standard procedure. Muhammad himself took part in beheadings of between 600 and 900 men of the Jewish tribe Banu Qurayza. Soon after this massacre, he ordered the beheadings of another 400 Jews. Ibn Ishaq cites the event. Abu Abida told me on the authority of Abu Amr the Medinan, where the apostle got the better of the Qurayza He seized about 400 men from the Jews who had been allies of Oz against Khazraj and ordered that they should be beheaded. Muhammad set the pattern for the Muslims to follow. Ye have indeed in the message of Allah an excellent exemplar. Indeed, all the following generations of caliphs and Islamic leaders continued Muhammad's preferred method to kill by beheading. Even in the modern era of the 1980s, Afghan jihad warriors beheaded an estimated 3,000 Soviet troops. The Saudi Arabian government continued to decapitate anyone for criminal offences of the kingdom, such as witchcraft, apostasy, drug dealing, homosexuality, etc. Shobat analyzes the phenomena. It says no other world empire practiced beheading like Islam. The Roman Empire's primary method of execution of non-citizens was crucifixion, while the Catholic Church was drowning or burning. Only Islam has such a long-standing historical tradition of beheading, even having specific commandments in its holy book to strike off their necks. Quran 47:14. Now, what's really interesting here is Muhammad is beheading Jews, and we know after the fall of Jerusalem by the Romans that there were still Jews and Christian converts from the southern kingdom in these regions, even converts that the apostles went to from the northern kingdom, the remnant of the people of Israel. And, we have all the line of judgments in the Bible. We have the seal judgments, we have the trumpet judgments, and we have the bowl judgments. And they're talking about specific times and different judgments. As I've stated, the different feasts, or the different feasts represent the harvest of the people. And the first fruits were part of the first people that went in with Jesus, the wheat and the barley. And the different feasts represented the different harvests of the different fruits. So in the time of the Crusades, from the time of Muhammad to the time of the Crusades, we're having this persecution and tribulation that's happening to the remnant of the people of Israel, or just the remnant of people and Christians who are going through these tribulation times. It seems pretty obvious that this is what's happening. And it was a forced conversion. I'll go on to show that later, that it was either to be part of this financial system that was linked to trade and the Silk Road, and it was linked to tax. And if you did not convert to Islamic or Catholicism for the people in Europe, to these three faiths, then you would be ostracized from the system, where you could not trade. You could not be part of the system if you weren't bending the knee to one of these faiths. Or you would lose your head in the case of Islam if you did not convert. Again, Islam fits the theme of beheading those who do not submit to Islam or the Mahdi, Antichrist, or worship, bow, submit to his image, crescent moon, or the black stone of Mecca. The black stone is an idol or an image. In the historical, archaeological, and theological definition, all Muslims are required to bow to the black stone of Mecca in their daily prayers. So all mosques face Mecca. And as we saw in the other article I read, that in the old days, all mosques faced Petra, where the Kaaba stone was located. So apparently, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, or 666 talents of gold is 22 tons, which today is worth over 1 billion. This was the amount of gold that King Solomon received in payment and gifts. So this was from the king of Tyre. So that's a crazy amount of gold and wealth. And it shows how wealthy this trading belt was, and the city of Jerusalem, how important it was to these trading connections. In 1 Kings 10, Verse 14 says Solomon's great wealth. It says the weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. Besides that, from the traveling merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the country. So Solomon was receiving 666 talents of gold for taxes that he collected from these trading belts and from other nations around him who wanted to use them or pass through his country. So the number 666 in the Bible is reference to Solomon. It is reference to the mark of the beast. And the Bible says he who has wisdom, it's the number of a man. Now, I think this man is King Solomon. And I'm not saying that he's the beast, but there's a connection here between Solomon and that number. And it is what I believe is taxes from trade. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So in this article here by the United Church of God, it says international trade, a source of Solomon's wealth. Solomon built many merchant ships manned by both Israelite and Phoenician sailors. The wealth accumulated by this maritime traffic is astounding, even by modern standards. However, how far did those fleets travel to amass such wealth? We don't know, but the scriptures tell us the sailors sometimes required 3 years to make a round-trip voyage because the distance was so great. They brought back valuable commodities such as gold, silver, and ivory, along the exotic curiosities such as apes and monkeys. This is in 1 Kings 10-22. More than 2 millennia after Ferdinand Magellan sailed around the world on a voyage that took 3 years, the fleets of Solomon and the Phoenicians could sail far and wide over the oceans. The scriptures note that King Hiram's mariners knew the sea. Having an international fleet of ships, an alliance with the Phoenicians, and control of major Middle Eastern inland trade routes, Solomon engaged in his own import and export ventures. For example, Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Q, and the king's traders received them from Q at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. So through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Aram in 1 Kings 10:28-29. The Bible notes that Solomon's yearly base revenues amounted to 50,000 pounds of gold, not counting the gold he received from gifts and tribute. In Chronicles 9:13 and 14. Having access to this vast wealth, Solomon built a magnificent temple for God and a palace complex for himself in Jerusalem. He covered the inside walls and even the floors of the temple with pure gold. Images of 2 cherubim, each with 2 almost 8-foot wide outstretched wings, overshadowed the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. Artisans overlaid these likenesses with pure gold. Craftsmen made the 7-branched menorah, a table for the showbread, bowls, pans, other lampstands, lamp trimmers, ladles, and censers of solid gold in 2 Chronicles 9-3-4. Solomon had a large throne of ivory overlaid with gold. He supplied his guards with hundreds of gold ceremonial shields, the large ones made with about 7.5 pounds of hammered gold. His palace dining service included solid gold cups and plates. The scriptures note that none of them was made of silver during Solomon's time because it was considered too ordinary. This was literally Israel's golden era. We can see that Solomon has made a lot of money via trade. Now, it wouldn't have just been the sea trade of the Phoenicians. It would have been the Spice King's Road trade that ran through Jerusalem. And so we can see how important the king of Jerusalem was to these trading belts and how much money Solomon brought in to the kingdom. You know, these nations around Solomon weren't just giving him money for nothing because he was King Solomon. I mean, there was trading deals going on here. This is all based on trade. So here's some information about the Queen of Sheba, gold and spices. It says, she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great abundance, and precious stones. There never were any spice such as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. This is in 2 Chronicles verse 9. It says here, why were spices of such note in this account? Why would they have been gifts worthy of a king of Israel? There are several reasons, some going further back into antiquity. A primary consideration is one of the commerce. According to a note in the Women's Study Bible, Sheba's considerable economy was dependent upon worldwide overland spice trade. Solomon's new trade alliance with Hiram, king of Tyre, may have caused the queen concern since her merchants must travel through Israel in order to reach other distribution points. Her gifts, including an abundance of spices, were no doubt part of trade negotiations and as such were expected. 1 Kings 10:22-25 fills in some of the detail. Arabia was known for its dominance of the spice trade and went to great lengths to guard its trade secrets. It was not above using disinformation as the origin of its precious commodities, many of which came from as far away as India, nor the routes used to procure transport them. By keeping a corner on the spice market, Arabia, and in this case Sheba, could control the supply, charge exorbitant prices, and thus far avoid paying duty. There was much at stake during this meeting of two formidable potentates. So, spice and aromatic gum were quite valuable. Some of them were purportedly demanded more precious than gold in demand. As early as Genesis 2:12, bdellium, a fragrant gum resin which is thought to be from the arid regions of West India, is mentioned. Another mention of spice is found in the Joseph narrative of Genesis 37:25. Joseph was cast into the pit by the jealous brothers and eventually sold to a caravan of Ishmaelites, some say Midianite, spice merchants traveling the main route from Gilead to Egypt, possibly one of the routes the queen intended to use. So this was the ancient King's Road spice trade. Though hundreds of years later than the time of Solomon, in the days of the early Roman Empire, naturalist Pliny the Elder in his Natural History wrote that a pound of pepper, the cheapest and most available spice, would buy 40 pounds of wheat. And a pound of the finest cinnamon oil, which most likely came from India or modern-day Sri Lanka, would cost a centurion up to 6 years' work. Wow. So we can see from this how important Jerusalem was and how taxes were raised by traders coming through this center. And it's the same back medieval times. The market cities of Europe and England, the Catholic Church would tax the travelers coming through. They would have to pay tax on the bridges. They would have to pay tax to partake in the market. So everything related to trade is related to taxation of the people. So going back to Revelation 17, and one of the seven angels shows John, and he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour. So purple was from Tyre, who King Solomon was trading with, the Phoenicians, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her head was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. So in Revelation 18, it says, when the woman falls, or Babylon falls, it says, the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. and explains all the things that Solomon traded with: gold and silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet, wood, ivory, precious wood, iron, brass, marble, cinnamon, odors and ointments, frankincense, wine and oil, all the things that were traded on the Silk Road and the Spice Road. And I'm just going to go back to 17 again, verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Now, if we put this in context of the Crusades, and as I've pointed out, the 10 horns, I believe, are the 10 tribes of Israel amongst the beast of the sea, the Crusaders coming into the Holy Land to take control of Jerusalem and the trading belt that is there. And it says here that they hate the whore. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords, King of kings, and they are with him are called the chosen and faithful. And the 10 horns which outsaw us upon the beast shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou saw is the great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So if we have a look at the Crusader capture of Jerusalem in 1099, and says here the final victory and slaughter. A group of remaining defenders fled in panic to the dome of the rock, but with no possibility of effective defense, they surrendered to Tancred, who promptly hoisted his purple banner over the mosque of Al-Aqsa, just as he had done a few months earlier at Bethlehem. Meanwhile, a second group, still commanded by Iftikhar ad-Dawla, rallied in the Tower of David in the southern quarter of the city, where they were met by Raymond. The governor offered a huge ransom to spare his life and his bodyguard. Raymond accepted, but they were the only Muslims in the city who would live to see another day. There followed a mass slaughter of the Muslim and Jews of Jerusalem, the latter being seen as accomplices. Figures of 10,000 by William of Tyre, 65,000 Matthew of Edessa, and 75,000 Ibn al-Ithir killed are all very likely an exaggeration, as a contemporary Muslim source, Ibn al-Arabi, which had no motive for minimizing the carnage, puts the figure at 3,000 of the city's probable to 30,000 residents. Still, the barbarism of the Crusades shocked even Christians, and the episodes would never be entirely forgotten or forgiven by the Muslim states. William of Tyre's description of the carnage, written in 12th century CE, became one of the standard reports of the slaughter, despite the chronicler being born 30 years after the event. He quotes, "It was impossible to look on the vast numbers of the slain without horror. Everywhere lay fragments of human bodies, and the very ground was covered with blood of the slain. Still more dreadful was it to gaze upon the victors themselves, dripping with blood from head to foot." Phillips 33. The city was systematically ransacked and looted for its precious objects, and when the dead piled up to such an extent that they threatened to spread disease, Muslim prisoners were forced to burn the bodies of their fellows outside the city in huge pyres before themselves being massacred in cold blood. So not only did the Crusaders slaughter and burn the bodies of the people of Jerusalem, along their walk and the way to the Holy Lands, they also are said to have cannibalized people because they had no food. The siege of Marat, or siege of Ma'arat al-Numan, occurred in late 1098 in the city of Ma'arat al-Numan in what is modern-day Syria during the First Crusade. It is infamous for the claims of widespread cannibalism displayed by the Crusaders. So around the end of November, thousands of crusaders started to besiege the city. The citizens were at first concerned since Raymond Pilate's expedition had been such a failure, but they taunted the crusaders. The crusaders could also not afford to conduct a lengthy siege as winter was approaching and they had few supplies, but they were also unable to break through the city's defense, consisting of a deep ditch and strong walls. Marat was not as rich as the Crusaders had hoped, and they were still short of supplies and food as December progressed. Most of the soldiers and knights preferred to continue the march to Jerusalem, caring little for the political dispute between Bohemond and Raymond tried to buy the support of the other leaders. While the leaders negotiated away from the city, some of the starving crusaders at Marat resorted to cannibalism, feeding on the dead bodies of Muslims. The chronicler Radulf of Sayen wrote in his contemporaneous account, Gesta Tancredi, some people said that, constrained by the lack of food, they boiled pagan adults in cooking pots, impaled children on spits, and devoured them grilled. These events were also chronicled by Fulcher of Chartres, who wrote, I shudder to tell that many of our people, harassed by the madness of excessive hunger, cut pieces from the buttocks of the Saracens already dead there, which they cooked. But when it was not yet roasted enough by the fire, they devoured it with savage mouth. So Albert of Aix remarked that the Christians did not shrink from eating not only killed Turks or Saracens, but even creeping dogs. So as we can see, the Crusader tribulation, I guess you could put it, on the Holy Land was one of murder, killing, blood, violence, and burning, as well as cannibalism. So is this what's described in Revelation when it talks about the burning of the whore of Babylon, the Holy Land, that at the end of the Crusades pretty much fell into ruin as the trade network from the Silk Road was cut off forever. Now, did Solomon reign over the kings of the earth? At that time, the kings in those regions all paid him tribute to trade through his kingdom. Was Jerusalem important to the Silk Road and the trading belt of the known time? Yes. Did the Crusader kings destroy Jerusalem along with the beast of the earth? Yes, they did. Did they hate the whore, the woman? They went into the Holy Land and they slaughtered Christian, Muslim, Jew. They had no empathy for anybody. They were greedy and robbed and looted. If we consider that the kings of Jerusalem, the Herods, and the hierarchy of the church moved into the Roman Catholic Church through the aristocracy of Rome, Constantine, and so on. The infiltration of the early Christian, in inverted commas, church by the Talmudic Judaism, the mystery Babylon teachings, the Jewish Pierre Leone banking family of Italy being behind Pope Urban, then we might be able to consider that the kings of this beast did turn on the woman and her people on the Holy Land of Jerusalem, and they did burn and devour her. And the merchants stood back and mourned because this great city that was one of the known world's trading hubs had been destroyed forever. As we saw when Mark Twain went to visit Jerusalem and the Holy Land, which I will show in the next video. During the reign of the Ottoman Empire, it was a wasteland, and even today, although the city has been rebuilt and called Jerusalem and Israel, it is no longer a trading hub, and that In fact, it is funded mainly by the Western nations like America, who give massive amounts of taxes towards Israel. They want to resurrect the Belt and Road, Silk Road project, but as the Bible tells us, it will never, ever be resurrected. So what does the Bible tell us about usury? In Exodus 22:25, it says, "If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him as a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury." Now, we know that the Jew doesn't charge his fellow Jew usury. But to Christians, they say that they don't have to respect these laws because we are not at the same level as them. So taxation in the Middle Ages says in the early Middle Ages, taxation was based on the ownership of land. However, by the 13th century, many people became rich from trade rather than from land. As these wealthy merchants did not own a great deal of land, kings began to impose taxes on trade. For example, in 1275, King Edward I put a tax of 6s and 8d on every sack of wool that was exported to other countries. Taxes were also imposed on movable property. People had to have their property valued by tax officials. Then they had to pay a percentage of it, usually about 10%, to the king. This tax created a great deal of bad feeling. It was claimed that people sometimes bribed the tax official to assess the property below its real value. In this way, it was argued the rich were often able to use their wealth to avoid paying taxes, and nothing's changed today. The proceeds of the tax was quickly spent on war or absorbed by corruption. In 1380, Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, suggested a new poll tax of 3 goats or 1 shilling per head. Another charge in the tax was that everybody had to pay the same amount. Most peasants at the time only had an income of about 1 groat per week. As everybody over the age of 15 had to pay the tax, large families found it especially difficult to raise the money. For many, the only way they could pay the tax was by selling their possessions. The peasant felt it was unfair that they should pay the same as the rich. They also did not feel that the tax was offering them any benefits. For example, the English government seemed to be unable to protect people living on the south coast from the French raiders. So increased power of the church. During the Middle Ages, the church acquired great economic power. By the year 1050, it was the largest landholder in Europe. Now, this probably has something to do with these Italian bankers, the Pierre Leone, and whoever else was with them. Some land came in the form of gifts from monarchs and wealthy lords. Some land was taken by force. The medieval church added to its wealth by collecting a tithe or tax. Each person was expected to give 1/10 of his money, produce, or labour to help support the church. The church also came to wield great political power. Latin, the language of the church, was the only common language in Europe. Church officials were often the only people who could read. As a result, they kept records for monarchs and became trusted scribes and advisors. The jizya is a per capita yearly taxation historically levied in the form of financial charge on dhimmis. So what's a dhimis? Is a historical term for non-Muslim living in an Islamic state, legal protection. The word literally means protected person, referring to the state's obligation under Sharia to protect the individual's life, property, as well as freedom of religion. That is, permanent non-Muslim subjects of a state governed by Islamic law. The Quran and Hadiths mention jizya without specifying its rate or amount, and the application of jizya varied in the course of Islamic history. However, scholars largely agree that early Muslim rulers adapted existing systems of taxation and tribute that were established under previous rulers of conquered lands, such as those of the Byzantine and Sassanid empires. So initially, jizya was only applied onto the Jews and Christians, while pagans were not covered under the dhimmi system. So here's a persecution through taxation of specifically converted Jews to Christianity. during these Crusade times, or Jews specifically, and an incentive to convert to Islam. It says, as Islam spread in the Indian subcontinent, jizya was applied onto the Hindus as well. Together with Kharaj, a type of individual Islamic tax on agricultural land and its produce developed under Islamic law, a term that was sometimes used interchangeably with jizya, tax levied on non-Muslim subjects were among the main source of revenues collected by some Islamic polities, such as the Ottoman Empire and Indian Muslim sultanates. Jizya rates was usually a fixed annual amount depending on the financial capability of the payer. Sources comparing taxes levied on Muslims and jizya differ as to their relative burden depending on time, place, specific taxes under consideration, and other factors. So it says here in the Encyclopedia Britannica, jizya, originally intended to be used for charitable purposes, the revenue from jizya was paid into the private treasuries of the rulers, and the Ottoman sultans used the proceeds to pay military expenses. Many converted to Islam in order to escape the tax. So it says here about Muhammad. Medina is where Muhammad began his military career, mainly out of self-defense. The Meccans would not tolerate his existence, and Muhammad did nothing to discourage this feeling as he raided Meccan-sponsored caravans. His raids began out of need, but then expanded as war broke out. Initially, however, Muhammad's raids were ineffective as most of his men were city dwellers and not well versed in warfare. Muhammad then began to establish relations with local Bedouin tribes, after which the caravan attacks became successful. The first major battle was at Badr along the caravan route to Syria. In January 624, Muhammad marched with slightly more than 300 men towards Badr, hoping to intercept a large caravan returning from Syria. While he expected to have to deal with only 30 caravan guards, he encountered a Meccan force 3 times his size that had arrived to escort the caravan to Mecca. Now we know Mecca is Petra now, and isn't it interesting that all of this information keeps tying back to these trade routes? The Meccans were divided on whether to fight or not, as they had secured the caravan. However, the Hawk party won out and they attacked Muhammad's party. After some skirmishing the various champions, the battle began in earnest. The Muslims held their lines and shot arrows at the Meccans. The Meccans advanced towards the sun and over the sand dunes against the Muslims. In the end, the discipline and ardor of the Muslims, who truly saw it as a life or death struggle, won out. The half-hearted attack collapsed and the Muslims routed the Meccans, thus gaining an important victory for the Muslims. So we see Muhammad raiding and killing in the name of his new religion and stealing and looting money from caravans. Thus, in early 630, Muhammad marched on Mecca and the city surrendered without a fight. Is this what happened to Petra? In return for its submission, Muhammad did not allow his men to pillage the city. The only damage they did was to smash all the idols around the Kaaba, showing to all the Meccans that indeed Allahu Akbar, or God, is greater than their gods. After this, most of the Arab Peninsula came under Muhammad's control, and raiding parties struck at the Byzantine and Sassanid empires. One reason for this was to keep the often quarrelsome tribes occupied by attacking someone else rather than each other. Although Muhammad died in 632, his accomplishments as a military commander are overshadowed only by his accomplishments as a religious leader. Now, what did Muhammad do in taking Mecca or Petra? As we know, the Mecca of today is not the original Mecca, which was Petra. The Mecca of today was of no use to the trading route and had no resources and was a very small, unimportant town. What we can see here in this story is that the Meccans of this time were a military guard protecting trading caravans. So what Muhammad has done by taking this region, taking Petra, is to take a prime trading city on the Silk and Spice Road. So according to this blog by Imran Firasat's anti-Islamic blog, okay, he's stating here that Muhammad, who was not actually a prophet but indeed was a mafia, never received any message from Allah, but falsely he declared himself a prophet and created false messages saying that those messages are from Allah. His objective was clear: to make his mafia gang, his followers and his country, Saudi Arabia, developed and get respect by everyone. He spread the message to all his Muslim followers that I have been commanded by Allah to fight them infidels until they bear testimony to the fact that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. There's a lot of whitewashing of this history online now, saying that this wasn't the case. He also spread a clear death threat to all non-Muslims. Submit and testify that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah before you lose your head. Today we have these dragon bankers of London charging us exorbitant amounts of tax on everything. And do we have these kings of Israel like Solomon? This is why the Freemasonry loves Solomon so much. Are we paying tax to the kings of Israel or big Israel? I'm going to play a video on paying tax and what Jesus really said about paying taxes. Obviously, we have to pay taxes, or all of us are under the mercy of the state. We end up in jail. We end up losing everything if we don't pay tax. And especially in the time of what I'm showing here with the Crusades, that not only did the people of this region have to pay a religious tax to the Ottoman Empire, to Islam, because they would not convert into the Muslim faith, the Roman Catholic people had to pay tithes and taxes too to the church. It was very hard to live outside of the system or to function, but most of the time people were ostracized by not being Roman Catholic. Not only that, there was the Roman Catholic persecutions of people who refused to obey the church. There were the witch trials, the inquisitions. So we can see that paying taxes to these religious beasts was actually being forced into a system of worship that was part of a merchant system where you were required to buy and sell, and you had to take this mark of servitude to this system. Sometimes the end result of that was to lose your life for your faith, and in the Islamic form was to lose your head. And if we read this Revelation statement here, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, the name of the beast, the number of his name, and we put it in the context of being taxed to buy and sell, there is nobody in any of these systems that have ever been able to buy and sell without paying tax. And to be part of a beast system is part of paying taxes or paying for the privilege to live within the system, and being forced to worship either the emperor or the religion that that beast chooses to follow and force people to worship. Hence, people worshipping the beast with their mind or in their forehead and believing this system, and persecuting others who don't, or those who pretend to worship the system with their hand and do the actions and show people that they believe it, but in their thoughts and mind they don't worship it. yet still they are choosing to take the mark. So it's part of giving to Caesar what is his, and usually what is his is an unjust weight.
There are a few significant references to taxes in the Gospels, and, as usually happens, when you look at them closely, you discover that the churches have done a good job of distorting virtually all of them. I want to examine what Jesus actually said about paying taxes, and about our relationship with the governments of man in this video. Let's start at the end and work backwards. At his trial, Jesus was accused of forbidding people to give tribute to Caesar. Although Pilate was not convinced that Jesus really was trying to incite insurrection against the Roman Empire, the question of whether or not Jesus was encouraging his disciples to disobey the occupation forces was something that the Jewish leaders saw as problematic. And I think it is still problematic today. Before declaring that he saw nothing treasonous in what Jesus stood for, Pilate asked Jesus straight out whether Jesus was the King of the Jews. Jesus' answer, as we'll see in another reference later, was cryptic. "You say it," is what the King James Version records him as saying. Young's literal translation says that he replied, "You do say." Either way, this could be understood as meaning anything from, "That's what you say, but not what I say," and that does seem to be what Pilate assumed he was saying, to something like, "Spot on, you hit the nail on the head, yes, I am the King of the Jews." But my main point is that the issue was a hot one, both then and now. So let's back up in the Gospels to the specific encounter that happened between the Jewish leaders and Jesus, which led to the Pharisees believing that Jesus really did think that his authority was greater than that of Caesar's. It's covered in all three of the Synoptic Gospels, which is another hint that this issue is important. Here is Matthew's version, and they are all very similar. They straight out ask, "Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not?" Jesus recognizes that they are trying to trap him. Now, this is a very important clue before we even touch on what Jesus says in reply, a clue as to what Jesus' real position was. You would not ask any of the big-name evangelists in the world today, "Is it wrong to pay taxes?" Matter of fact, you would not even ask such a question of any of the little-name evangelists in the world today. They would all vow and declare that it is wrong not to pay your taxes. They might give some excuses for paying as little tax as possible to comfort those members of the congregation who manipulate things to get maximum tax deductions, but the bottom line is still that all good Christians pay their taxes. Isn't that right? We would rarely think otherwise. So why did the Pharisees see a need to ask Jesus such a question in the first place? And why does Luke say that Jesus perceived their craftiness by asking such a question? Why does Mark say that they were trying to catch Jesus in his words? And why does Matthew record that Jesus accused them of being wicked hypocrites because they were trying to tempt him? Bear in mind what the political situation was like at that time. All good Jews supposedly believed that their nation was led by God, that it was above any of the other kingdoms of the world. And yet, the country had been invaded by Roman armies, and the people had been forced to live under Roman rule. They were all struggling with conflicting loyalties at this time, quite apart from any kingdom that Jesus might be building. Whether the tension is between loyalty to the kingdom of Israel versus the Roman Empire, or whether the tension is between loyalty to the kingdom of heaven, as Jesus taught it, versus the various governments which each of us live under today, what you will find to be most consistent in both, or should we say all, as far as the tension between church and state, is that the religious leaders will ultimately side with the state. Listen to the religious leaders at Jesus' trial. They not only accused Jesus of preaching another kingdom, which of course he did, but they loudly declared that their first loyalty was not to that other kingdom, nor to the kingdom of Israel, in the event that the two kingdoms were different. John records it in his account of the trial of Jesus. It says, "From that point on, Pilate sought to release Jesus. But the Jews cried out, saying, 'If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend.'" They were seriously claiming to be more loyal to Caesar than Caesar's own appointed governor. That is just how fanatically pro-human government they were. And it is pretty much the position of churches everywhere today. Given the opportunity, they would all be playing golf with the president and laying hands on him in order to curry favor from the various governments of man. John goes on to say that the religious leaders were shouting, "Kill him! Kill him!" To which Pilate replied, "Do you want me to kill your king?" Maybe Pilate was just being sarcastic. He could certainly see through the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. Even today, Jews would have us to believe that the reason they have rejected Jesus is that he did not have the right credentials to qualify as a Messiah. But that is simply not true. What they wanted was not a Messiah. What they wanted was a Caesar, and almost any Caesar would do. Listen to them. The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And they still have no king, and they still have no Messiah. But one day soon, the ultimate worldly king is going to rule the world, very likely from their precious so-called holy city, and they are going to fall down and worship him. But most disturbing than that is that most, if not all of these chief priests of the church world will be right there beside them, groveling to the Jews, promoting their city and blessing their temple, even though all of it will be coming from the ultimate source of evil. But let's get back to what Jesus himself said in reply to this trap that was being set for him. The trap, you see, was aimed specifically at forcing him to take an open stand against the ruling government of his day. He had been asked whether it was lawful or right, as most modern translations put it, to pay Roman taxes. Jesus says, "Give me a coin." And then he asks, "Whose picture is this on the coin?" Obviously, both the coin and the picture had come from Caesar. Caesar made the money, and he put his picture on it. And money is what people use to pay taxes and to do all forms of business in the various systems of man. Nevertheless, in a few short years, this will no longer be the case. There will be no coins, no cash, no other forms of money apart from a special mark in our right hand or in our forehead with which to pay taxes and with which to do all business transactions. That mark will have been created by the rulers of this world. And the question we need to very soberly ask ourselves is this: is it right to take that mark in order to pay our taxes, in order to provide for our families, in order to be good citizens? The various governments of the world are even now working towards greater unity in shifting us from a cash-based society to an electronic one which will soon be able to identify every person on the planet. The question and how we answer it is crucial. So Jesus asked them, "Who made the money?" And they tell him that it was the ruling Roman government that made it. A government which many early Christians believed to be the government of the predicted Antichrist. And then Jesus gives his answer: "Render to Caesar." So there you have it, straight from the lips of the Son of God, the King of Kings, the Jewish Messiah. He said it himself, "Render to Caesar." Oh, what a sigh of relief must have spread through the crowd that day, and a much bigger sigh of relief has spread around the world ever since, as preachers everywhere have been telling us that Jesus said to render to Caesar. But what is missing? Can you spot it? Over and over again, I've pointed out how almost everything that Jesus has said has been twisted to mean virtually the opposite, when all we really need to do is to pay attention to what he really said. And this is no exception. Listen to the full quote. "Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God that which is God's." Can you see the difference? Yes, like Jesus' answer to Pilate when asked whether he was the king of the Jews, the statement that comes out of Jesus' mouth is one of great wisdom and a little ambiguity. He knows how people think. They will all hear what they want to hear. And so all that the masses have heard from that very important quotation have been the first 3 words, or perhaps the first 7 words, "Render to Caesar that which is Caesar's." This message has been preached for centuries, almost like it's the 11th commandment, but only for those who cannot even imagine a government controlled by anyone greater than just one more Caesar. But there is a very tiny handful of people who have listened to the second half of the statement, which is summed up in the words, "Give to God what belongs to God." That is what Jesus said. Give to God what belongs to God. But he hid it from the minds of the rich and powerful by the way he started the sentence out. There is nothing deceptive in what he said. It is totally correct. Each one of us must work out for ourselves where our loyalty begins. On the basis of our biases, we will arrive at quite opposite conclusions and quite opposite lifestyles. Most of the world starts with Caesar and gives God the leftovers, while those of us who are able to see that invisible kingdom of heaven which Jesus represented start with God and then decide how much of the leftovers they are able to give to Caesar without compromising their faithfulness and obedience to Jesus. But what about Paul? I invariably have people asking. Now, those of you who know me best would not be surprised to see me shrug my shoulders and reply, "What about Paul? Do you really think I care if Paul contradicts what Jesus said and did? Paul isn't the Son of God. Paul didn't die for my sins. Paul cannot save me. Jesus alone has the words of eternal life." But, if for nothing more than to show how the process grows after one first chooses to reject what really happened in that exchange between Jesus and the religious leaders over taxes, if for no other reason than that, I'll look at what Paul has said about service to worldly governments. His thoughts on the topic are mostly summed up in the 13th chapter of his letter to Christians in Rome, where the Roman government was most powerful. Paul virtually quotes what Jesus said in the 7th verse of this chapter. In the first 6 verses, he was admonishing Christians to submit to all who are in authority. He went so far as to say that whatever authorities exist have been put there by God to reward the good and punish the evil. But he doesn't come right out and identify these authorities as being the governments of man. Like Jesus, Paul appears to have worded this in such a way that it could either apply to the Roman government under which they lived or to Christian leaders in general within the fellowship of believers. Then Paul gives his readers the 7th verse, letting them decide who it is that is really worthy of honor and who it is that we should really fear. In case his meaning is not clear, Paul expresses great wisdom in the 8th verse of this chapter, where he says quite bluntly, "Owe no man anything." In other words, even if we do choose to submit to some of the ordinances of human governments, it's important for each of us to be clear in our own minds that it's not about us being obligated to obey anyone. We do not owe anyone the ultimate loyalty that must be to God. Out of love, but not out of fear, there is room for cooperating with the various systems of man. But when any of those systems demand that we cross a certain line, something which compromises our Christian faith, then we must, with Peter and the other apostles, say to the various rulers of the world, we must obey God rather than men. That is the bottom line. We ought to ultimately obey God and not any human authorities. Now, let's return to another incident with regard to taxes, one that only Matthew included in his account of the life and teachings of Jesus. Someone came to Peter this time, not Jesus, asking Peter what his take was on paying taxes. Let me just clarify something here which is open to dispute. The original Greek says that they asked Peter about a specific tax with a specific value, 2 drachmas. It was a relatively minor tax, not much more than $1 in today's value. 2 grams of silver, 1 for each drachma. However, because a specific value is given for this tax in the Greek, many modern translations have inserted into this passage 2 words that do not appear in the original, stating that they constitute a temple tax and not a tax to be paid to the Roman rulers. They have done this on the basis of a tiny rule in the Old Testament that Jews were to pay a tax of 1/2 of a shekel toward the maintenance of the temple. Now, 1/2 a shekel would have been worth about 4 times as much as the 2 drachmas that are mentioned with regard to the tax in this passage. But that discrepancy is overlooked at the same time that the words temple tax are inserted. Now, I'm not an expert on Greek, so it is possible that they were asking about the temple tax without the passage actually saying so, but it's certainly not clear that it's a temple tax. In fact, there appears to be more evidence to suggest otherwise. The liberty that has been taken with regard to translating it as a temple tax may be part of a larger attempt to steer the general public away from anything that would make more clear the powerful implications of what Jesus said in that more public and more famous encounter with the Pharisees about rendering to God what belongs to God. I say this because in the next verse, Jesus refers to the kings of the world, and he refers to taxes which are paid to the kings of the world. This is all done with no mention of the Jewish temple. Ultimately, however, the point is still this: we are under obligation to no one. As Paul implied in Romans 13 verse 8, we owe no man anything except to show love. But we have here, in Matthew's Gospel, a much clearer expression of what Jesus' real position is on obligations of any sort towards the various governments of the world. And yet I would not be surprised if 99 church attenders out of 100 have never heard a sermon preached on this intimate glimpse into something Jesus shared very privately with his disciples. Why? Isn't it because this story is much harder to twist than the earlier one, where you just quote, "render to Caesar" and leave the rest out in order to achieve the desired distortion? So, what happens after Peter is approached on the subject? Peter, like most religious leaders would do today, gives a knee-jerk response. Yes, he declares, of course we pay our taxes. Jesus avoids a public disagreement between himself and his most impetuous disciple, waiting until he can speak to Peter more privately, and then he asks Peter a leading question. Do the children of the king need to pay taxes? What is Jesus doing here? He's trying to get Peter to think about what it means to be adopted into the family of the King of Kings, about what it means to have discovered a greater kingdom, a higher revelation of authority than the systems and governments of man. And Jesus wants Peter to conclude what we have just heard Paul say, which is that we owe no man anything. Read it for yourself. The children of the King of Kings are free. This use of the word free is a very good choice. It hints at why it is not easy to categorically state the Christian position in relation to earthly governments. We are free not to abide by the laws of the land. But, at the same time, we are free to abide by those laws. The primary issue here is not whether or not we obey a law, but whether or not we are acting in faith and love. Someone has said, true freedom is not to be found in being bound to a rule, nor is it to be found in being bound away from a rule, but instead, it is that glorious feeling that you get when you know you are doing God's will. In so many areas of our Christian walk, we need to learn how to take it or leave it, based on whether it is God's highest plan for us. And that's why the next verse is so important. Nevertheless, Jesus said. What an interesting word. It introduces something which kind of contradicts what has just been said. We are free not to obey the laws of the land. Nevertheless, and that is where Jesus goes ahead and pays the tax. But he does so in a way that makes it clear we don't have to get a job and earn money in order to keep the Caesars of the world happy. He and his disciples, then and now, continue to refuse to work for mammon. trusting our Heavenly Father to provide the means to pay such a tax if He thinks it is better to pay it than to unnecessarily offend someone by not paying it. We need to stay constantly open to His leadings about which position is right for each situation. It's very likely why Peter mistakenly answered too quickly in saying that his master paid taxes. Our position as Christians must be to cooperate as much as possible with the various governments and organizations in the world, but not to the point of being obligated to do that. There are many places in the world today where it is unlawful to share your faith as a Christian. Most of the world demands that citizens be prepared to kill enemies of the government in times of war, and one day will not be able to buy or sell anywhere in the world without first accepting a mark in our right hand or on our forehead. In all such situations, we must obey God rather than man, and we should be willing to literally die before we would back down. Are you ready for that? The closer we get to the return of Christ, and the closer we get to what He taught, the more courage it is going to take to stay single-minded in terms of our loyalty to God. We are working on developing that kind of dedication even now as we band together in preparation for that final showdown. If you'd like to do the same, please contact us at the address shown on the screen. I look forward to hearing from you today. God bless you.
Now, although this video does promote futurism in the Antichrist, and it also promotes a physical chip for a mark, and I don't deny that that's a potential for the future, especially when we think about the technology they have now with the nanoparticles that can be injected. I don't deny that that's going to happen, possibly. I think that's what they want to do. That's always part of their agenda, is to tag their slaves. I do agree with the information regarding the taxing and Jesus' opinion on it. And the fact of the matter is that we are in a Babylonian system that has run since Nimrod, and that we have never known anything other than that. And the whole concept of the kingdom of God and Jesus' kingdom was, and still is, extremely radical and hard for people to conceive anything other than we've known. So we can see from the beginning of the dictators trying to draw the nations together under one rule, like Nimrod, that we've had taxation. It says that the origins of taxation was first known in ancient Egypt around 3000 to 2800 BC. And that's around the same time of Babylon. So we can see these pyramidal structured societies with the kings or the dictators on top who have a feudal system that taxes the people, and the burden becomes too great for the people to bear. The Bible never speaks highly about taxation or unjust weights, and it's highly likely that this is tied into the mark of the beast. It's possible that that's what was being referred to in the book of Revelation here in the time of the Crusader Holy Land. But if it's yet to come in time, there's no doubt that we are under a very oppressive government that wants us to be taxed or to be slaves and own nothing. And a lot of these systems always come down to bending the knee to the statue when the music plays, to accepting the religious system of threat of being removed from being able to buy and sell.